to our People Committee. For those of you who are unfamiliar with live streaming, it's normal for me to say if I drop off the call, then Tom Halpin will step in and chair the meeting until we get connected. We are delighted to be joined by staff associations, HMICS and trade unions. They certainly enrich the discussion that members can have at the committees, but just as a reminder of the order of play, what would typically happen is those who are presenting the paper present the paper. Board members then will question and comment on that, and then others, staff associations, trade unions, might come in, they'll not question, but they might come in with a perspective, and then board members can go back and further question the information and the data that we've had provided. So we've had no apologies. So we have full attendance. Declarations of interest, none have been notified in advance, so I'm making the bold assumption that we have none. And in accordance with section 20 of our standing orders, I'm inviting members to agree that we'll take agenda items 8 and 9 in private. So that then means staff association trade unions will join us for items up to and including 8.1, and after that it will be members only for that final discussion. So minute from our last meeting in 31st of May, people content that it's accurate? Yep. Any actions that anyone wants to raise that aren't either on the action log or later on the agenda? No. We've had no decisions that we've considered between our last minute, and I realise I'm out of order, Debs. I'm now looking at the rolling action log.
No, I was just going to ask you with regards to the action log, there were a couple of actions that perhaps we would maybe want to go back to after the discussion to see if members were content. So maybe propose we review the action log again at the end of the public session.
Yes, that would be grand. So I think there are probably a couple of areas there that we might want to roll forwards into other areas. But yes, we can agree at the end of the public session what we're doing with that. And that then means we're passed on to Katie Miller for the Health and Wellbeing report.
Good morning, Chair. Thank you. I'll obviously take the paper as read. I think highlights that I would call out is particularly in relation to 214, where we start talking about preventative assessments and really our growing agenda in relation to the requirement for evidence-led evaluation and insight, which obviously People Committee and Board have been asking for. Continues to be a work in progress, but we are making inroads on that. And I think we could start to see some examples of that, particularly in 2.12.4, where we start talking about examples of impact in relation to particular questionnaires and approach to that. I think apart from that, I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Members, any comments or questions on the paper? Paul?
Yeah, I'm looking at 2.9 and the stage 4 ongoing evaluation of youth programme. Is this, when can we expect to see the results of the evaluation?
Yes, thank you. So at 2.9, the example that we can start to see in terms of high-level metrics are the conversations we've been having about the development of strategic workforce dashboards. So we are hoping that when we bring the people strategy and the strategic workforce plan for People Committee and Board, we will have in there some prototypes of dashboards, one of which will be wellbeing. I think the ask of members will be the metrics are fine, but we come back to that evidence-led assurance and insight. So it will be the next level underneath that we still require further work on.
Okay, and that still doesn't tell me dates and when we expect to see that.
So we are working towards November is the board when we're bringing the strategic workforce plan and People Committee, and we're just working through the People Committee dates for that because we might require an extraordinary People Committee in October or November. So we're just finalising that timeline.
Okay, thanks for that.
Any other questions from members? Tom?
Katie, I'm aware of recent commentary from Staff Association, the Police Federation, regarding the adequacy of provision of occupational health services and access to them. And I know that, without going into the detail of the contract, because there is procurement issues here, so I'm not going near that at all. So it's existing service and the ability to access, things like in terms of trauma, etc. like that. I mean, it's concerning to hear the chairman of the Police Federation talking about having to access charities for that type of support because of difficulties in accessing our services. Could you give us any comments on that, please?
Yes, thank you. I think that we do recognise, with regards to both occupational health referrals and also employee assistance programmes, that the demand for those, is we can see it through the insight around absence, has increased quite substantially. In terms of the actual provision of contracts, we obviously have regular contract review meetings with the current provider, and we have in place SLAs. As part of the re-procurement, the decision that we've made is to re-procure those two pieces separately. So we will move ahead with Oc Health and EAP separate procurement. And I actually think, having looked at the procurement documents, we've been very careful in this particular exercise to make sure that we call out what I would call a standard provision that you would expect to see in any organisation, but then specifically we've posed questions around the uniqueness of policing and what that might mean, particularly in relation to roles and exposure to trauma. So I think what I can say is that, going forward, we're very clear on that. I think at the moment, there's a number of things I think that are related to that, some of which is stigma, and, how as an organisation we work harder to remove stigma so that actually colleagues feel that, they can make that approach either to their line manager or to support directly. But I think the other thing that, we would hear from both trade unions and the Federation is the accessibility and the visibility for frontline staff. And Tom, we need to work harder on that.
Okay, that's grand. And I'll maybe just take Chair's privilege, Alistair, if I may, and ask Katie, how confident are you that the service that we're going out to tender in terms of occupational health and EAP will be fit for purpose?
So I'm confident in terms of the requirements that we've laid out. If I have a caveat, the caveat for that would be we do have a budget envelope that we operate within. And as with any organisation, when you go out to procure, you have a sense of the demand that will come in, and then where you start to set some of your service level agreements. I think that it's not unique to Police Scotland. So, my experience of other organisations, unfortunately, has been that in the space of occupational health and EAP, for different reasons, there are challenges. So I think it's one of those areas that when we appoint the provider, whatever that procurement outcome is, we need to work really closely with them to make sure that it's not just the metrics of the SLA, but it's the colleague experience. And for us to be able to respond to that in a timely way, because we need to find a way to humanise it. We tend to see it as a process, form filling, and somebody kind of moves through, but there's a human at the heart of this process.
Okay, thanks, Katie. Alistair?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks for the report, Katie. I think it's a report that everybody welcomes, and it's really helpful to hear the progress that is being made. My question is kind of similar to the one that Tom asked, and under 2.4, the section on what people told us, that generally when people access systems, they find them helpful, but one of the challenges is people's workloads appear to be, extremely heavy, and in the current environment, there's probably going to be challenges in terms of changing that. So what are your thoughts on breaking that cycle of people being too busy to access the help that can be provided for them? So that was a question I had, because if people tell you things, what they expect is to see an improvement. Otherwise, they'll lose faith in it. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. And then I was also interested in terms of preventative assessments and the recent World Cycling Championships. And you basically, it reads like you use that as a case study. And I know it's quite early, but is there any initial thoughts or findings that have emerged from looking at the demands that a major event like that has on Scotland, and how would that inform you joining all these different things together for a coherent system?
Thank you. If I can take your first question around workloads and capacity, I think it would be amiss of me to say that I don't think that there are challenges ahead for the organisation. We're clear on our budget position. We're clear on, what that has meant for officer numbers, but then also what that means in terms of working with trade unions and colleagues around the impact on staff budgets. So there is no doubt that the next 6 to 12 months, it will continue to be challenging, if not more so. I think when it comes to absence and well-being, that there's no one solution to this. I always start with process. So when we develop something, whether it's our intranet pages, the language we use, how you access the service, we have to think about it with the colleague experience in mind. So let's not sit and design something that actually, when the end user or the customer or the colleague uses it, it doesn't make sense. It feels disjointed and it's not a straight through end-to-end piece. So I think that's the first piece. We've got somebody within P&D who we've actually tasked to look at all of the P&D content that we have, people in development content that we have on our intranet. And that has to be the start point for me, because even as still a relatively newish person to the organisation, just trying to find some of the flow through of processes is not always straightforward. So that's one piece for me. I think the second piece is leadership. So later on in the agenda, we talked to leadership and talent update, and we talked there about a particular programme that we've had in pilot that we're launching, which is the People Manager Development Programme. And there's a core pillar in that is around attendance and duty modifications. And that is about how we can help managers feel confident and competent to have really good conversations, to recognise the signs of when you start to see a difference in your team member. How do you start the conversation with somebody? How do you make it supportive? How do you remove stigma, etc.? And that for me is a really key piece. And we hear from managers, I'm too busy. I think my response will be, it is part of being a leader's role to be able to have these conversations with people. It would be expected that you have one-to-ones, that you notice, when there's a change in somebody. So I don't think there's one straightforward piece. The executive are working really hard in terms of looking at workload, seeing how we can reduce demand. But there's no simple, straightforward answers to that, but it will start to flow through in the next kind of month or two in terms of decisions. And I think with regards to evaluation, I actually can't talk to the cycling event. I don't know if one of my colleagues on the call might be able to. He's got a little bit more insight. But actually, for me, it is thinking about, so at 2.9, for example, that for me is a really good example of where we are really starting to think about what the evaluation might look like. So if we look at some of the evidence-led evaluation in 2.12.4, we talk about specific impact of patient health questionnaires and what we call a combined generalist anxiety disorder assessment. And we talk about the level at the point of somebody starting counselling, and then that assessment at the point of them completing counselling. And that's the type of evidence and assurance that you're asking from us. But that, for me, starts to get into that space of what you need from us.
Okay, Alistair?
Yeah, no, Thank you, Chair. Thanks for those responses, Katie. And as we would expect, there's a lot of crossover with papers that are on today's agenda, and I appreciate you highlighting some of these themes today. And I'm sure we will pick them up a little bit more as we follow through.
Yeah, no, I think that's right, Alistair. And I think the data dashboard that we'll be able to talk about in the coming weeks will be helpful, and as you say, that will give us the evidence of evaluation and the evidence of improvement. Before I open up to the staff side and federated the staff organisations and trade unions, can I just ask a bit more about workload? So you've talked about difficulties, challenges, reducing numbers. What practical and positive steps is the organisation taking to make sure that everyone has a workload that is manageable?
It's a very good question, a very pertinent question, and probably one that's quite hard to answer, I think. We have in place governance that is specifically looking around what's the programme of work, because it's not one thing that we are going to do to address. So at the moment, we look at organisational-wide initiatives. So whether that, for example, is looking at RRDs, when they're council toil balances, etc., so that we can understand what that looks like and the insight from that. And then we have specific work streams that are around officer. So if we've reduced to 16,600, what does the prioritisation look like? We're looking at rank ratios in that space. We're looking up at officers who are acting or temping. And then also looking at divisional commands and whether or not there's further efficiencies or alignment that could be made in that. We're also then looking on the staff side around the 3.7 reduction on staff budget, which is where we are at the moment. So we are looking again at executive structures, any efficiencies in terms of portfolio. We're looking at spans, layers, organisational design, etc. So there's an end-to-end programme of work now that is underway and in place. I'm not sure if DCO wanted to come in specifically, Chair. Apologies.
No, that's fine. I'll bring David in, but so I understand precisely what you're saying, Katie, and I think that's helpful to have that approach described. I'm needing more assurance about the proactive work that's been taken to make sure an individual, whether it's an officer or police member of staff, has a manageable workload on typically. Now, I know that things move and things change. I'm not talking about the untypical day, but a typical shift for people have a confidence that actually their workload is within reasonable limits. And I'm happy for David to come in if that's something you wanted to bring in on, David.
Thanks, Chair. It's a really good point. The key management of that sits with line management. It's the line managers that need to make sure that the workload on individual officers and staff is not excessive. We laid out very clearly at the start of this process that by reducing to 16,600, by reducing the staff numbers by a pro rata amount, we would not be expecting those who are in that pool now, the reduced workforce, to pick up additional work because we've reduced it. And it goes right back to that statement the Chief made around the fact that we would have to reduce our level of service. The important point is to reduce the level of service. One of the indicators around that is obviously the use of overtime. We've got the RPG strategic group, which I co-chair with DCC Graham. That's the mechanism and the messaging that goes from that mechanism down to ACCs and chief superintendents and down to superintendent chief inspectors, which should be reinforcing the message. And we've had these conversations with the Federation and the trade unions about not expecting the staff that are still here, that we've not reduced, to pick up additional workload. If that's happening, then that should be reported back up the management line. And I've said to the trade unions that if they've got examples of that happening and it's not being addressed, then they should report that straight back up to me, and I'll pick it up at RPG strategic level. So there's a couple of kind of mechanisms in there, including a mechanism that goes round traditional line management straight back up to DCC Graham and myself. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, that's great. Thanks very much indeed. Alan, I'll bring you in. I'm also thoughtful about the incident reporting system, and if that would be a mechanism that would be used for staff to be able to report that in a systematic way. Alan.
Thanks, Fiona. I just wanted to obviously offer a perspective from an operational policing officer's perspective. So obviously in every shift officers are on, they are briefed at the commencement of their shift. There is an absolute commitment across the organisation to ensure that officers get the appropriate refreshment breaks during their shift, and there is a thorough debriefing process at the end of the shift. I think some of the pressure that comes to bear on officers is they can only deal with one thing at a time, but it's the pressure of knowing that there's a build-up of demand waiting for them to be clear, and that's where the supervisors, in my mind, have got a clear role. But officers will attend an incident and they will know what else is going on in the division, and they will feel a pressure that when they're clear of this incident, they need to get to another incident. So the role of the first and second line managers around supporting those officers is critical, and I think that's at times where that fatigue comes from, because they are just being expected to deal with one incident after the other, and at times that's perhaps where, if line managers aren't strong, then it encroaches on refreshment breaks. It gets them towards a late finish at the end of the shift. So the role of first and second line managers is vital, and that's some of the work that we're doing in the leadership space and through the selection process for new sergeants.
That's really helpful. Thanks.
I've probably triggered a couple of things with my staff.
No, I think that's helpful. I think it was time to bring the staff, our colleagues from the staff side organisations in anyway, but I absolutely understand what you're saying, Alan, is that the supervisors are the gatekeepers of the workload, and we then maybe either just now or later on the agenda need to think through, everyone needs protection, everyone needs support, including the supervisors. So David from the Federation, then Susie.
Thanks, Fiona. I thought I might be able to get away without pushing the button, but Mr. Spear's comments there have. What I would say at the start is I absolutely agree with the statements that he said. My experience is that they are not a reality, and I don't mean to be dismissive of what was said, but there are a couple of points at the start. When we talk about the potential for increasing workload, that suggests to me that there is capacity for operational officers at the moment, and I can assure you there is not. The notion that briefings are being held at the start and end of shifts, I'm afraid, is simply not a reality for a vast number of operational officers. And the point I agree with the most is the role of first and second line managers. Those from within the environment I live in will know that. My concern is at the moment that we are not giving those people who are so critical to the delivery of our services the tools that we need to give them to be able to do it. But I am very encouraged that the work is ongoing, and I know the SPF are involved in that. The overtime thing, again, we will look not to be short-termist, but the reality is if we have a couple of cops who are coming to the end of their shift and are told that they are not going to be held on, and we bring two more in, medium to long term, that just fills the process up when it comes to court citations. So there is a clear balance between short-term savings and what we then impact in mid to late term. But the evidence that is there, there was an FY that the Guardian did, I'm sure you've seen it, about the number of officers who are off sick with mental health challenges. The evidence doesn't support the fact that we are on top of this. I think everyone would probably accept that, and we just want to play our part in trying to resolve some of the issues that exist. But some of the sort of the suggestions that everything is rosy, I'm probably just going to stop speaking then, I think. Thank you.
David, that's really, really helpful. I mean, I think what I've heard today is absolutely an understanding and a recognition of the challenges. There are not exclusively because of the reduced numbers, but that is certainly playing a part in it. That there are processes that are in place that need to be improved, but there are small green shoots of these processes beginning to be improved and producing improved outcomes. We have a system and process in place that Federation's involved in, and I think we are all very grateful for the Federation's support in finding solutions in terms of protecting officer and staff well-being. Thank you. Susie.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, welcome the report and all the work that's ongoing. There's a limit to how much we can remove stress and trauma from the role of being a police officer. It's in the nature of it. So people will attend traumatic events. They will have to deal with critical incidents. They will have to deal with people who are at an emotional low. All those things, and we can do our best to build resilience, and there's some very good work going on in that area with lifelines, etc. So there's a limit to what we can do around that. So we really have to look at the other areas. What are the, if you like, things that don't really need to be happening? So I think this committee is very good at joining the dots between overtime, re-rostered rest days, annual leave not being taken, and the well-being agenda. I'm not always convinced that internally Police Scotland is as good at that. So when it's discussing things like, for example, how we're going to manage that reduced workforce with the demand that we have, I'm not always convinced that well-being is wholly at the centre of those discussions. It may be tacked on at the end. Maybe that's unfair. I'll let come back, but I always feel like I'm the Jiminy Cricket at the end of some of these meetings, asking about, well, what about well-being? In terms of the EAP, sorry, this is a little bit scattershot because there was a number of things that came up in the discussions. The EAP, I think there is a perception that current providers sometimes just signpost to charities rather than actually providing a service. I am, until tomorrow, a trustee of police care, and I will resign from that tomorrow when I leave the service. And I got the opportunity when I was down in their offices to have a look at anonymise some of the requests from Police Scotland. So I couldn't see who they were, but I could see what they were asking for. And financial issues are more and more featuring in the requests to police care. Undoubtedly, that is a factor. So looking at things about how we reduce costs for police officers and staff, do we move them so that they're having to drive extra distances? Do we look at things like the work-life balance? Are we looking at how many people are asking for secondary employment, etc., and just measuring that? I think that is a potential indicator that people are feeling under stress financially. Also, we have been involved in the tender process for occupational health. Very pleased to say that my input and ASP's input was taken on board, and so that is happening. I can give you a reassurance around that, Chair. In terms of other indicators that the committee might want to look at, I would have thought time taken to complete inquiries. If you're spinning a lot of plates, it can take a long time to get through that workload. So if we see those starting to stretch, so times taken to carry out investigations or warrant inquiries or firearms inquiries, if they're starting to stretch, it's because people are having to, pick something up for half an hour, drop it, go and do something else, come back to it, a couple of days later, and it's just that plate spinning thing. So that's something that could be looked at. And just as David said, I would be hugely surprised if everyone's sitting down with a proper thorough briefing at the start of the day. That could very easily take the temperature on that. Just ask for some honesty from supervisors. But I know myself, and I'm going back a long ways now, when I was a beat officer, but crime rates were somewhat higher. Quite often you were literally in the door grabbing your jacket and running back out again, and I would imagine that's still the case now, or perhaps even more so now with reduced numbers. So the reality is that you're not getting that time with your colleagues to get properly briefed, or I would imagine that's the case, but it would be easy enough to take the temperature on that and see if I could be proved wrong. So I think there are things that you can look at in terms of hard indicators to say, well, actually, if they're starting to wobble or stretch, then maybe that's just showing us that we're not managing that demand, and that will have an effect on people, undoubtedly. So I think that's covered all the points that I jotted down, but I appreciate all the work that's being done. I don't want any of the my police staff colleagues to think that's not appreciated. Absolutely it is. And I know everyone on here it wants to absolutely do their best for the public and for our colleagues. So it's not to be critical of that, but just there are some key facts of life that we just have to face at the moment. And one of those is the demand and the size of the workforce to meet that demand.
Susie, that's really helpful. I had an informal catch up with the Federation last week, and we talked in similar vein about actually the joining up the dots of policing and performance resources and people committee, and how that probably needs to feed into, I'm not sure if it's the overarching resources framework, but making sure that we can make these connections and draw comparisons and monitor and evaluate that. So it's something I raised with the chair as well when I had my one-to-one with him yesterday. So I think that in terms of use of data and monitoring will be helpful as we go forwards. Now, Brian, I know that David has already contributed. Is there anything additional that you wanted to comment on?
Just very briefly, Chair. First of all, is to thank your personal commitment regarding the well-being of officers and staff in Police Scotland. And I've been at a number of events with yourself in Glasgow and the DCC designate as she was then, and that's very positive. One thing I would say that hasn't been articulated on the screen this morning that I've heard is obviously the reduction in resourcing levels. There doesn't appear to be any sort of management oversight regarding risk assessments for that process, which would be your basic starting point to review that. And I know that nationally, you can give a national overview of the situation. But if you look locally to areas where there is significant pressures on the resource left in the north and the east, per se, in comparison to colleagues in the west, then there'll be a completely different picture. And then if you look at the studies that David talked about that we saw in The Guardian, if we then looked at that areas and saw where the greatest impact was on mental health and those abstractions from the front line, then basic risk assessments, if they were done correctly and properly, would ensure the safety of our members.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thanks for that, Brian, in terms of the risk assessment. And these, I think, are all adding, and I'll ask officials to make sure that when we note in the minute, we're pulling out in particular the areas that we think will be helpful for us to monitor and evaluate and make things as safe as we possibly can for the workforce. So I think that has had a good rehearsal of that. So thanks very much for everyone's contributions. Going to move on now to Policing Together.
Yep, morning, Chair.
Morning, David.
I don't know if that's my cue to come in, but thanks for introducing that. The paper is there. I'll just pull out a couple of points and observations, and then happy to take questions, of course. So the paper outlines a kind of situation report on Policing Together. I've done a lot of work over the last couple of months around governance, added a new group, which is the tactical board, which again is going to collate activity across the 4 subgroups, and also a lot of work on the implementation plan in terms of reformatting, a bit of a foot in the ball moment around reducing the number of actions so we can prioritise and concentrate on the next period. So significant reduction and tidy up within that plan. I do recognise the plan is very much still activity focused, so a key driver for us going forward is going to be outcomes. There's a logic model built into it, but again, when we report on this going forward, we'll move towards tying some of this into the work that Katie has mentioned around the dashboards and pointing towards overlay of data in terms of the outcomes that we expect to see through that logic model within the plan. The next piece is the appendix, which shows an aspirational figurative presentation on Policing Together performance. And again, that's really sort of aspirational data, which again, we'd hope to produce in real terms from November onwards. There is still more work to be done between the EDI outcomes, which are statutorily reported on, and the overall Policing Together activities. So we hope to, as that paper hopefully illustrates, bring those together so we can report on the progress. towards the outcomes in both of those endeavours, and hopefully start to join them together. I've had some input from John McLean at the Performance and Insights group. Again, some suggestions that he's made from the authority's perspective in terms of how that work would go forward. And there's a fair bit of workshopping of elements such as the anti-racist organisation commitment, and how we will do that. So we've got some academic support in that and some models that we're going to look at, which again I'm happy to present as we develop that work going forward. But in essence, the paper is there, and happy to take questions. Thanks.
Okay, thanks very much indeed. I think I'm hearing you say work in progress. Imagining how you will, well, I say imagining, you've clearly worked on looking at how you'll provide evidence of assurance for us in the coming weeks, really, in terms of moving things forwards. So thanks for that. So first of all, I'll take Michelle, then Alistair.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks very much for the report. So for me, it's a really good description of an awful lot of activity, of energy, of resource, of commitment to tackling this issue, and that's welcome. So I do appreciate that. But in contrast, what seems to be lacking for me is a real sense, if you like, if you're looking specifically at the plan, is the right-hand column in terms of impact. So you have some description of activity in that measures column. So we will have achieved this, we'll have done this, we'll have finished something else, etc. But what is lacking, and if I'm honest, it tends to be lacking in quite a lot of reports that come to this committee, is a measure that identifies the extent to which all of that activity and energy and resource and commitment is making the difference that you're describing in the column over on the left-hand side. So, you know, and nobody is underestimating the effort that's going in, but if the effort that is going in is not justified, if you like, in terms of positive difference that it's making, then you should be putting that effort somewhere else. And for me, the indicators don't give you the insight around the extent to which you are having the impact that you've desired. So, and I won't go through the examples, but if you look at them, a lot of them are about outputs and very little about impact. And the worry for me is that you won't know. So you will have expended all this energy, and you won't know whether it's made the difference because it's not articulated in a way that's clear. So I suppose that would be my thought, really, is how specifically you're going to say, we've done all of this, this is the difference that it's made, and this is how we've measured the difference that it's made, as opposed to we've measured the number of things that we have done. If that makes sense.
Thanks, Michelle. No, Davey?
Sorry, I totally take that point on board, and I probably clumsily tried to outline that's the sort of next phase of the post footing the ball side of things. So a lot of the work has been trying to actually focus down on the activities that people are conducting, following that logic. If we conduct those activities, we should deliver those outcomes. So we do have a lot of actions that have been completed within that plan, which is sort of reflected in the aspirational report in terms of the pie chart and the reds. So we know that we've completed a lot of activities which have then led to new actions. The next step is, as you've outlined, right, what data, what insights, and what other evidence can we produce to demonstrate the impact, and particularly in this space, as you've mentioned, the insights on whether those are having the right influence on our progress. So I take that on board, and we will report on that more tangibly going forward.
Could I just kind of come back on that? So I appreciate that the second appendix is a kind of, you're thinking around measuring some of that, but I still think that if you look through the detail of the proposed measures in that second appendix, they still feel quite output focused rather than necessarily outcome focused. So there's a very clear intention to have the workforce representative of the communities, but there's very little about what you're actually going to do to increase the reach, for example, of your recruitment campaigns into a more diverse population, and then what you're trying to achieve by that in terms of quantum, and how you're going to measure that, and because that will then give you insights into what you might need to do more of, less of, differently, etc. And I think so your intention in that second appendix is a good one, but I think it could do with some more refinement in terms of a really an outcome focus. Now, how are you going to measure those outcomes?
Yeah, again, I agree, and some of that is work that Katie's team are progressing in terms of the dashboards and data lakes into scope data that hitherto has been difficult and probably manually manipulated to produce the reports that we are able to produce. So there are codependencies with the Power BI work that's ongoing, and we're really focused on bringing that into the reporting that we'll do under Policing Together.
Okay, and I think Michelle's point, I think, about making sure that the effort that you're putting in is actually doing what you want it to do is a helpful guide in terms of you making it, helping us get to progressive outcomes sooner rather than later. Okay, Michelle, anything else you want to follow up with that? No. Okay, Alistair.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for the report, David, and the update. The thrust of my question was really very similar to Michelle's. I would like to see a little bit more baselining of where we are at this moment in time with the intended outcomes. That would be helpful, I think. But without extending the points that Michelle has made, the other thing for me is that Policing Performance Committee, we relatively recently agreed a new overall performance framework. So it's the alignment of this performance reporting with that overall performance framework within Police Scotland. So I'd just like some assurance that has taken place. And then the second question that I had was really following up on some of the initial conversations we've had about pressure on resources within Police Scotland, and in particular how that then feeds through to pressure on individual officers, individual teams in the organisation. And within the action plan, there is a lot that says it will be dealt with and progressed within existing resources. But given all those pressures and the conversation we've already had about you cannot just keep adding to people's workloads, how are you going to reconcile your ambition, the need for it to be resourced, and the current circumstance that we find ourselves in?
Yeah, so first of all, the performance framework. So Director Tom McMahon sits on the Performance and Insights group. He's the co-chair of that group. So Tom is very much steering us in terms of the overall performance framework and making sure that we accord with that. So I can give you that assurance that we will make sure that Policing Together performance aligns with that. The pressure on resources, I'm really hugely focused on that. So by way of example, we are prioritising divisional governance structures just now, cognizant of the fact that, for example, within divisions you might have multiple structures which are reporting on various elements, which then adds to the pressure on what they have to deliver within the pressurised resourcing picture that we have just now. So we had a workshop with people in development. I've had one-to-ones with all the divisional commanders, spoke at the Divisional Commanders Forum twice, and we've basically handed the task to commanders to come up with a mechanism that doesn't add work but refines some of those structures, so we should only take mechanisms once instead of asking for multiple reporting. So that work's ongoing, and that'll feed into what we do towards November. The actions and existing resources, I've spotted that myself, but it's a really good observation. The initial implementation plan, just about every action had, will be delivered within business as usual resources. I think that was probably meant in good spirit, but it's not deliverable. So separately, the next phase of the work will include a costing model for each of the actions. So, don't tell us it's going to be done within existing resources. Tell us what you need, and then we'll make an assessment as to whether that's going to be feasible within our current resourcing and whether there's a risk-reward balance to it. So we'll report on that to the committee in due course.
Yeah, that's really helpful to hear that approach, David. I mean, I don't underestimate in any way, shape, or form, the overall demand on policing and the number of priorities that you have. But you have to be ruthless in your strategic decision making in the current circumstance, and that has to be based on solid judgment, so that you then make the appropriate conscious decisions. So, it's really good to hear that approach. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Paul?
Yeah, it's about timelines, and just an appeal for a bit more clarity on those, because they look vague. Some of them are defined in there, but the bulk of them are either medium, long, or short, and there's no definition of what that represents. And I think that would be helpful. Otherwise, how are we going to know how to hold you to account for something that's medium term if we don't know what medium term means when we're expecting to see results on that? So it's just an appeal for a bit more crystallizing of that.
Yeah, no, I take that on board. So that will be built in once we get a better understanding of the resourcing, the prioritisation, and the availability of data on that. But I would plan to have target dates built into that plan, as you would expect.
And do you have a sense, David, when we will see the target dates?
So my overall kind of target is really November, when we're going to report on the equality outcomes. So that should give us a couple of months of doubling down and probably adding a couple of columns into that plan.
Okay, that's great, thanks. So that is the members' questions. Anything from ASPS or the Federation? No. Okay, that's been a good conversation, good discussion about that, and look forward to seeing the continued progress as well. Jackie, so we're over to you on ill health retirement update and injury and duty.
Thanks, Chair. Morning all. So I'll keep it brief. The paper sets out the progress that's been made on and the ongoing work within the ill health retirement and injury and duty review that's currently being progressed jointly by People and Development and SPA. Just to add some additional context to the data at the end of the report, over the last 12 months, there's been a more than 50% reduction in the number of officers currently in the ill health retirement process, with the average time taken to see an SMP reduced to 5 months compared to 13 months in October last year when this started being measured. I'll leave it there, but I'm happy to take any questions on the detail in the report.
Okay, that's grand. Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, it is coming back to exactly just what you're touching on. 2.3, it does give a specific 65 ill health retirement cases and 53 injured on duty. What was the statistic for last quarter one, the year before?
So actually, what I can tell you is probably more of an up-to-date figure. So at the end of July, there is 61 at the end of July, and at the end of July last year, there was 132. So that's where we've got the greater than 50% reduction.
That's terrific. And what about in IOD cases?
IOD is a bit more difficult to,
yeah.
So the IOD cases kind of fluctuate slightly different, and because we've managed to move so many people through the ill health retirement process, that's had a knock-on effect into the injury and duty. So the numbers are very similar to last year. There hasn't been the same drop, but that's because of the increases in ill health retirement, which has that knock-on impact. So they are well managed, and that the delays are not there anymore that were there previously. So I can give that kind of assurance if that helps.
No, that's helpful. But injured in duty doesn't automatically mean ill health retirement, does it? Just means they're not able to work at the moment.
Ill health retirement doesn't also, so you need to be ill health retired before you can claim an injury and duty award.
Right, okay.
And it's not automatic that just because you've been ill health retired you would get an injury and duty. Just the numbers have obviously increased over the last 12 months, so therefore the proportion of those who are then eligible for an injury and duty award has increased as well.
No, that's great. That's really good progress. I know this was a real headache when I was chair of the legal committee, so it's nice to see it really turned around, and it's a significant cost saving, I would suggest, to the organisations.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely good work that's been done to kind of progress that, and I think we need to give credit to the team within People and Development who have put the real focus on this and moving this through the system. So I think that's real credit to that team.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Jackie.
Thank you, Alistair.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Jackie. I really just wanted to welcome the paper and the progress that is highlighted within it. If we go back to our first discussion on well-being, you know, one of the, you know, if somebody has been injured on duty, or if somebody is you know, facing a point where they've got to receive ill health retirement from the service, it's an extremely difficult time for people, and has to be managed, you know, very sensitively. It's a very regulated situation as well, and there's other players in it, you know, not just Police Scotland. So it's good to see how you've reviewed the whole system, you're making progress here, and ultimately, you know, we don't wish anybody to find themselves in this situation, but if they do, for them to be managed sensitively in the way that's been described, I really appreciate that and the progress that's been made.
Thanks, Alistair. And I think, Jackie, it would be helpful if we could see data being delivered, the data that of quarter by quarter, year by year, so that we can actually monitor trends and make sure that it's continuing in this way. And in particular, we've talked about, you know, what would the best outcome be? So how long would one typically wait for SNP? So I think if we could see the data within that, and obviously we're going to get a report, a wider report on issues that impact on ill health retirement in November as well. So it's good to see all of this work coming forwards.
Thanks, Chair.
Okay, anything from ASPS or the Federation, Susie?
Yeah, just to say, echo the other comments on the work that's been done around this. I mean, as ASPS, we don't very often have a member who is faced with ill health retirement, but I know when we have been supporting people going through that, it's a very stressful time for them, and there's a lot of uncertainty. So anything that can make that process more effective and efficient is really helpful. I just wanted to clarify something in the paper, or ask a question really from Jackie in the paper. As you said, previously you'd have to have the ill health retiral agreed, and then you would go to the injury on duty. I see in the paper it talks about doing them simultaneously, probably just to. So what you're saying is we could actually submit paperwork at the same time, or I just wanted to clarify that it's not something that ASPS, as they often deal with. I hope I'm not stepping on the Federation's toes, because they would probably deal with these a lot more regularly, and just sort of clarify what's meant by that. Thanks.
Yeah, so currently what happens is the individual goes to see the SNP for the ill health retirement determination by the SNP. Once that's done, the authority then approves or otherwise their ill health retirement. They then have to go back into the system and see the SNP again to make that determination of an injury and duty. And all we're proposing is that one appointment that the SNP can make both of those determinations. However, the injury and duty wouldn't be approved until after the ill health. So at the latter stage, it would still be then split back into two processes, because we need to do the injury and duty part first. But it's just so we don't need two SNP appointments, therefore cutting out some of the time lag that part's been taken.
That's terrific. Thanks, Chair. That answered the question for me. Thanks, Jackie.
Okay, now I have two voices from the Federation coming in. Brian or David?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'll go first because I got my hand up first. Just to applaud the work of the teams, reduced that number significantly. That's been a significant concern, and those numbers going down is very positive. But it's also to acknowledge the comments of Alistair about the human impact that has on individuals. In every individual case, it's a significant concern, because that's one person who joined the service, but for whatever reason isn't able to conclude that service, and the impact on them and their families.
That's great, grand, thanks. And David, we're going to say something similar, maybe?
Exactly the same, Chair. I don't need to repeat it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So noted, and good to see the progress in this area. Moving on to Amanda for the summary report on the mental health conference.
Thanks, Chair. I will assume the paper is read and just draw out some key points. So we held the conference focused on policing and trauma in April of this year, a well-attended event with around 100 partners and stakeholders, as well as our own officers and staff from the policing system involved, just to highlight the huge amount of support that we had for that event across staff associations and unions. It was a real collaborative event across the Authority, Police Scotland, Forensic Services and all of our associations and unions, and I think that made for a really successful discussion on the day. A difficult subject for us to focus on in terms of trauma and wellbeing across our workforce, and some of the actions that could be taken to progress a focus in this area. 3 key considerations as outlined in 2.2 of the paper around what can be learned from elsewhere, what is currently working and where could we improve. A full range of speakers across both our own organisations and external stakeholders and partners, international experience there as well, and I think really positively and powerfully an input from officers and staff themselves about their own experience of trauma and delivery of their own role. A number of emerging themes and next steps are described in the appendix to the paper, which will be delivered by Forensic Services and Police Scotland in the main, and a commitment to follow up regularly through this committee on progress against delivery of those. Just to highlight that it links to a paper being considered by Police and Performance Committee on the 12th of September, which is looking at the outputs from the Mental Health, Trauma and Vulnerability Conference that took place in December of last year, and linked commitments to that that are described in the paper today. Happy to take any questions and obviously have colleagues from Police Scotland here who can speak to some of the detail about next step commitments.
Okay, thanks very much, Amanda. Any comments or questions from board members? I think for me, it's the practical, tangible. So how will we know? And there are dots that are being joined up, but how do we make sure 2 things don't fall between or one thing doesn't fall between 2 stools when we're seeing all of that? And I'm wondering if thought's been given to that whole system proactive approach. So there's something about well-being. This is in terms of traumas and the psychological challenges, which we've had well rehearsed today, as opposed to other issues that affect well-being, but they're not mutually exclusive. Is there something, or maybe Amanda, I was going to say I'll maybe ask Katie, but Amanda, is there something then in practical terms, how will we get a plan on a page that where we see what commitments have been made and what commitments are being put in place, and measuring the outcomes as a consequence of that?
Absolutely, and Katie can obviously speak to the detail of that in terms of the policing response far better than I can. Just want to highlight that today I'm at an event on looking at how we build resilient communities together, which is looking at a much wider wellbeing focus, and actually really helpful to have Damien here. He's leading a lot of the wellbeing work internally, but I think we are starting to join together the conversation about the wider impacts that living in society have on individuals, and how we join the dots across the response across a full range of those factors. So definitely something I think to tie in and bring back.
Okay, thanks. Katie, anything to add on that?
Thanks, Chair. I think it's an extremely helpful paper, and even looking at the emerging themes around what we can learn from elsewhere or what works well, you can already start to make the connections then between some of the work. So, for example, peer support. We've called out muster rooms, but actually even thinking about wellbeing champions. So we've agreed that we'll go out and we'll recruit further more wellbeing champions. We've had 3 briefing sessions with them to say, what steps do we take then to evidence the difference that you are making in your role as a wellbeing champion? So I think it's definitely something that we can draw alignments to, and we should draw alignments to. And in terms of, the dashboards, think about, how we can call out that evidence for you. But I can see very clear alignments between where we're going with insight and evidence and what's come out of the emerging themes.
Okay, so by the time we finish this, I'm going to bring Alistair in this item. I would quite like a suggestion about how we monitor and measure the steps, practical steps that we're taking. Alistair?
Thanks, Chair. My observation and comment on this would be that the event in itself had real value in terms of almost like a continuous professional development event. So for everybody to come along, and it was really well attended, and it was supported. There was visible support, you know, from the senior leadership within Police Scotland. So for me, what that did is it speaks to the importance of these issues. It recognises them, but for everybody that attended it and heard the powerful stories, had the conversations round the tables, when they're dealing with you know, the range of challenges and with the ask that's being made of them, just because they've attended this event, they've got a much greater awareness, and they may have had formal training previously, but that formal training, you know, what was at a given moment in time and continuous professional development to keep up to date is really important. And just from that perspective, I thought that there was real value in the event. And if we can join it together in the way you've described coherently and a whole systems approach, then that I hate to say it, but it's almost a bonus. I think the value was almost in the event itself.
I think that's actually a very pertinent observation, Alistair, in terms of that, you know, attention to it and people being there and being refreshed and recognising that it's moving us on a journey. So thank you for that. Can I ask that Amanda and Katie, between you, integrate? So it would be helpful, the more joined up we are, the better, and the more single reporting systems, the better. And it would be helpful to, some thought could be given to, you know, what we've said we'll do, how we're going to do it, and in practical terms taking it forwards. But I think, as you say, Amanda, it was a whole team effort to organise, so thanks to everyone who've done that. Oh, actually, I do apologise. I should have asked if the Federation or ASPs want to come in and comment on it. Brian?
Yes, thanks, Chair. My camera's not working now, which is obviously a benefit for all on the screen because I've got a voice for radio. The event itself in Glasgow was fantastic, and it polarised, or sorry, it didn't polarise, it centred the approach collectively between the three emergency services, which is if you bring your resources together, you can address the problem more collectively. It's all right having pointers indicating where people can go to get the information. It's actually reaching out and making sure you attract people in through the door and they know they can get listened to. So if the three services are working together collaboratively with Lifelines and Lenny and Dr. John Morton, then all the better for all parties concerned.
No, I think that's a good point, and that powerful learning that we can have from each other. So we're going to move on then into the strategy, policy and planning section of the agenda, and we're with you, Katie, on the workforce MI report.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm going to take the report as read. A couple of key bits that I would call out, probably touches on the conversation we've had so far. That's in relation to absence and well-being. So when we look at the overall short-term and long-term absence trends, not uncommon actually across kind of UK statistics and other organisations, but we are seeing psychological disorders as by far the highest case of sickness for both of those types of absence. Also looking at the number of working days lost in relation to that. So overall, we're sitting at 6.44% absence for staff and 5.21% for officer. So I think as we've been talking before, it's about the nuances as to how we understand that. So that's just your top line figure. How does that relate to, as we've talked about, workforce capacity, work-life demands, assaults happening, cancellation of RRDs, so that you start to get that holistic piece. So we're working, as you'll be aware, Chair, but for other members, very closely with the digital team around how we start to move some of the quantum of this data into what they call a data lake during 2024, so that instead of having a static dashboard, you can actually start to pull together some of these dynamics across data that gives you a real-time picture as to what's happening. And then to your point around prevention, you can then start to see that real-time impact on the workforce and put in place specific bespoke interventions. I think the only other thing I'd call out is in relation to toil and re-rostered work days and the balances of those. We've talked about that at Strategic Leadership Board, at the last board. We are seeing a fairly consistent number of hours and days in relation to that. So toil sitting at just under 37,000 hours, and we can see particular areas in the organisation where it sits highest, and re-rostered work days sitting at over 64,000. So it's an area of risk and concern for the organisation. I'm happy to take questions. Thank you. You're on mute, Ken, sorry.
Thank you. I would just say we look forward to receiving the improved data and outcomes on that. Tom.
Thanks. Katie, my question's around in 2.3 musculoskeletal issues being the reason for most short-term absences in officers. Has there been any deep dive into that to understand the causes of these, etc.? I'm thinking in terms of the amount of equipment officers carry, etc. Is there any underlying reason why? In a period we've just come out of pandemic and into the cold season, etc., for that to stand out as the most common reason makes me ask this question.
Thank you, Tom. I'd actually say as well that reflects a trend that I've seen in other organisations as well as being the second highest reason for absence. So yes, there is further analysis of that. I actually don't have it to hand, so we can provide that. I think there's a degree of role related, so as you say, equipment, but there'll also be a degree of age demographic there as well for our workforce. So there'll be a number of different dynamics. So we can certainly provide a briefing paper with further analysis on that for you.
That will be helpful. Thanks, Katie. I'll bring Brian in for comments shortly. If I don't see any other members have questions, I just have one question, and it's about slide 21. Alistair, I see you, and it's about training. Can I ask what the planned training percentage of the workforce who should be routinely rostered for training, and if that's coming to pass?
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to have to say I actually can't answer that. I'm not sure if we have a colleague from learning and training on the call. If not, we would need to take that out. There you go.
So Fiona, I've got
Alan,
responsibility. Yeah, I've got responsibility for the overview of learning, training, development, and that is one thing that we absolutely measure. So what I can't give you just now is a definitive figure, but that's a very easy figure to give you, because we look at the provision of officers who need, for example, officer safety training. We set a programme of courses to fulfil that, and then we're carefully measuring the attendance rate in terms of officers participating in the training. So there's probably two categories. There's mandatory training, and then there's training that falls into the development phase, which would be quite separate. My experience in working with LTD is that the attendance on prescribed training courses for whatever the course is or the reason is very good. But I could probably take an action to get you a more definitive kind of statistical position on that.
I think that would be helpful, and maybe even a brief rounded briefing on how much of the WTE do we expect to be released for training, how much people attending. And I think you're right. I think the mandatory and statutory and mandatory, clearly all development's important, but that's absolutely critical to the safety and welfare of of the staff. So that would be helpful. Thank you. Alistair.
Thank you, Chair. Katie, without rehearsing everything we've discussed, or going over everything we've discussed earlier, not that I welcome that there is a lot of, that the number one reason for long-term sickness is psychological issues, but I just wonder if in some ways, now that we know that it makes it easier, for all the measures that are being put in place to actually be actioned, that people are prepared to actually come forward now, because in years gone by, people wouldn't have been prepared to put that down. They would have found, something else, to cover it. So now it's much more transparent. So I welcome the transparency, though I don't welcome the fact that it's a high figure. So I wonder what your thoughts were on that. And the second thing for me was around, the re-rostered rest days, and a new system coming in place in September. We've been talking about this for some considerable time now. I wonder what practical steps are going to be taken so that we can see a difference in this. To allow people to get their time off, and to recuperate. To spend some quality time away from work without all the demands that it brings to them.
Thank you. If I take your first question, I too welcome the transparency. I think it's a sign of hopefully diminishing stigma in relation to psychological absences from work. It's complex though, isn't it? Because there's no necessarily one driver at any one point in life. We have work, we have outside of work. The two things are very blended now. We have different responsibilities at different points in our lives, etc. I think it does help us in terms of having the transparency. What we still hear though is that we still need more trust in the system. So I still think that's probably masking the reality of perhaps what that figure could look like. So if I do step forward, how do I know I'm going to get a supportive conversation? How do I know I'm going to be listened to? How do I know where I go for support and that the organisation are going to give me that adjustment that might be required for a period of time? So I still think it's work in progress. I welcome it, but there's a lot more that we need to do around stigma and trust.
Yeah, thank you.
And in relation to RRRDs, which I can never say properly, apologies, I'm actually going to have to bring in a colleague if we've got somebody that can talk to the approach for September and benefits or potential improvements.
No,
we don't have. We'll need to take that away as an action, Chair.
That's grand. Thank you very much indeed. Brian, you've been very patient.
No, thank you, Chair. Just merely to give some degree of comfort to Mr. Halpin and his question regarding musculoskeletal disorders. Luckily, in Police Scotland, we now have one of the lightest sets of body armour around the UK, and invested significantly in that fact that the body armour that we have, in comparison to colleagues in England and Wales, is roughly 25% lighter to address those very significant issues regarding musculoskeletal disorders. Easy for me to say. So it's just to give you some degree of comfort. We're looking at that on a regular basis from those who work in the health and safety world as I do.
No, that's very reassuring, and thank you for that. Susie?
Yeah, just to make the point, and I would imagine Peter Blair is well aware of this, we're almost 20 days away from when the pension remedy is supposed to land. It will be interesting over the course of the next few days, I would think, to see if anything's going to happen in regard to number of leavers potentially. We've certainly tried in the staff associations to pour a bit of cold water on expectations, because we've been having very close conversations with the SPPA, and they will have real challenges, there's no doubt about it, in implementing the remedy come October. But just to make that point, we have to give 28 days notice. We're almost at that point, so it'll be worth just watching over the next week or so is to see if any additional resignation notes come in.
Okay, thanks, Susie. David.
Thank you. It was just on pensions and the comments in the document about it seems almost like statistical analysis of what's happened in the past to predict the future as far as the number of possible leavers from the 1st of October. I am not as confident as the author of that document that there will be no issue for the service come the 1st of October. And I just wondered if it was possible to give an answer as to where the basis for the document, the content of it was based on. Was it a question that was asked to people who potentially could retire come the 1st of April, or was it based purely on the statistical analysis of the past? Because I think there could, and from the information I have, probably will be much more of an issue than we seem to be appreciating here. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, David. So that caution, I think, a more direct caution than Susie was giving us, but still a caution, and it would be helpful to understand that. Peter, if you can do volunteering to help us understand the basis on which the predictions were made.
Yeah, so it's an actual data. So I monitor very closely the number of leavers that put their resignations in or their intentions to leave in. So we have seen a bit of a dip for September and there's about 35, 36 currently, but we haven't seen a commensurate increase in October or November. The numbers are still pretty low. So for October, we've only slightly over 50, and for November, we've only got slightly over 20. So the numbers are still very low as it stands just now. There's absolutely no evidence that we're going to see a tsunami of leavers coming in October, November, December. That's not to say that we might see more coming through, albeit the pool of eligible people has significantly decreased as a result of the large numbers of leavers that we saw through last year. But I remain alert to that, Chair, and I monitor it every week. But as it stands just now, I have no concerns.
Okay, thank you. The natural variation perhaps that we're seeing will. Okay, thank you very much indeed for that. So I think if we have no further comments or questions, and we're still with you, Katie, then on the strategic workforce plan and people strategy.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a verbal update. We obviously have these two key pieces of strategy development underway. As we've said, the timeline for this is for the board in November is what we are aiming for at the moment. We've got governance set up, including working groups, which have got representation of colleagues, trade unions, statutory staff associations. We've also had a couple of sessions outside of committee with people committee members, just to make sure that what we're developing is in line with your expectations and aspirations. I think both pieces of work are well underway, and I can't envisage any issues in terms of that timeline. Probably the biggest challenge that we've had, and we've talked to this earlier, is in relation to the budget position of the organisation, and quite simply the ability to write strategies that are aspirational in nature, which they should be, but are also ones which can be delivered within a financial and budget resource envelope as well. So I'm happy to take any questions in relation to that. Thank you.
Okay, comments or questions from board members? I think, as you say, we've been involved in the development. We're looking forward to seeing that being delivered. And I think the strategic workforce plan and people strategy very much companion pieces. And I think if you're right, there are scenarios and we'll need to see best and worst case. But again, these measures of effectiveness and implementation and how we will monitor going forwards will be helpful to see. So we'll move on then to the Q1 health and safety report.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everyone. So I'm here today just to present the report. Chair, I will take the report as read. The only thing that I would point out from the report is just in page 5 around about the custody audit reporting that you usually see. This will be the last time that you will see the report in relation to custody audits. The only outstanding issues, so 480 of the actions are complete. The 81 outstanding relate solely to Rothsay. Custody Office and CGSD, Criminal Justice Services Department, have just postponed that work just now to ensure there are contingencies, etc., in relation to that being an island office, and where the business as usual goes when those actions are being progressed. So we will not bring that back unless there are members who specifically want that back at the board. And other than that, there's nothing else that I would call out, and happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Any comments or questions from board members? No, helpfully clear. I think in terms of the reporting, it might be helpful again if we're seeing trends and monitoring and a kind of overarching report. So I think the understanding is the reporting has very much improved, but I think if we can again continue to work on seeing that whole system approach with monitoring and measuring on a quarterly basis, that would be helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And anything from Federation or ASPS? No. Okay, I think I'll take a 10-minute break, so if we can come back at 11:30. Thank you. To the biannual leadership and talent report from Katie.
Thank you, Chair. Again, going to take the paper as read. A couple of pieces that I would call out if I could, specifically around your leadership matters, which obviously for us is a priority area at the moment. So this is around developing capacity and confidence within our leaders. So that's both at a senior level, a mid-level, and also first line manager level. And that's specifically around leading and learning inclusively, having the courage to do the right thing, and collaborating for growth. I think what I would call out is that we have had very constructive conversations with the Police Federation, particularly in relation to this, and the balance between both YLM, but also more broadly online delivery versus face-to-face. And I guess how we kind of get to that point of where we're doing delivering in a practical way, particularly given the numbers for your leadership matters, but also making sure that we are delivering on what colleagues need. I think in the appendix particularly, we talk about the evaluation model. We have a very clear evaluation model for this particular programme. So we have level 1, immediate reactions, level 2 looks to understanding, level 3 is the behavioural change, and then level 4 is really the results. So we start looking at retention, well-being, perception, engagement of colleagues, etc. So it's still very much work in progress in terms of that evaluation, but certainly at the moment, initial feedback has been positive in relation to that. I'll probably call a close there, but obviously happy to take any questions in relation to your leadership matters or any other of the leadership initiatives we've got underway. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much indeed, Katie. Members, any comments or questions? Alistair?
Yeah, there's two areas that I would value Katie's insights into. There's a lot of activity that goes on here, and people have different needs at different stages within their careers, and there's also a focus on people that want to progress through the rank system on the uniform side, and obviously through the managerial on the staff side. But you've also got people that require support because they need professional development, or they're content. Their ambition is to be a career constable or a career sergeant, whatever. So I'm just thinking about how do you integrate all that together, so that you're getting the best return on the amount of activity, the amount of investment that's going in. So the way I see it in my head, it's almost like a cradle to grave, an integrated personal development system where people can go around the loop at different levels if they want to stay within that kind of level. But if they want to progress to the next level, you need to identify their potential and put them on the appropriate development courses. So it's tying it all together as a system and not viewing it as individual units. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that, Katie. And another one is around my career, and there was a need to extend the period for the my career conversations to take place. What's your thoughts on bridging that gap going forward to make sure that people see the value in it?
Thank you. And actually, I think your first question is answered by the second point, which is my career in part. So if I could start with that. So obviously for my career, that's the first annual cycle that Police Scotland have undertaken in relation to this. And with anything, there's going to be a bedding in period, and you're probably 2 to 3 cycles before you really get into a rhythm as an organisation. I actually think, when you look at the numbers that completed, which were 73.6%, and we had just under 16% started a conversation in my career, but didn't finish it on the system. So you're looking at about 90% have participated in one form or another. The question for me becomes the so what of that. So the only way that we'll engage colleagues in this is if they feel that there's been a value or a benefit to them. So that's either because they've had a really good discussion with their line manager and they feel they've been listened to, or we've responded as an organisation to what the reflection logs are within my career. So in one of the appendices, for example, we talk about the chosen development route. So as part of my career, we ask people to articulate, whether it's stay at level or if there's a progression. Yeah. And that's both for officers and staff. And we can see there that of those that responded in the appendix, you've got about 71% that want to maintain and develop in current role. So that's for officers and 88% for others. So there's a huge amount there of colleagues that actually want to stay at level. So I think that's to your point around CPD and maybe what ACC Spears was saying earlier about continued professional development, essential role-related development, and then whatever else. So whether that's, coaching that we could put in place, mentors for people, etc. So that kind of softer skill set. I think with your observation about there's a huge amount going on in this space, I actually think there's too much going on in this space. And I think my reflection since joining and the team are working on this is how we can simplify some of this so that we get down to maybe 3 or 4, call them signature offerings, call them core offerings, whatever you like, but actually, responds to the organisation. It's clear what that looks like, and we're clear on the evaluation of it and making the difference. So I think there are some pieces here that once we've done the analysis, we could potentially look at stepping down or stepping back from, and for example, putting more focus and resource behind a people manager development programme, which for me becomes a really clear signature first line manager programme that looks at positive workplace, attendance, duty modification, health and well-being. It's the types of things that line managers are saying to us, help us navigate how it is that we get through your systems, what I should do, what's the law around some of this, what's the policy position. So that for me, once we really get into that development programme, we've gone past pilot, becomes one of the pieces that we absolutely put maximum resource into.
Okay, Alistair?
Yeah, thanks very much for that, Katie. I think my own thinking would align with yours in terms of that complexity. And I think your point's really well made, in relation to the comments made by DCC Spears earlier. And just my final comment would be, it's invaluable, the support that people are given within role. So the focus on that, and it's interesting that that's the feedback to a great extent that's coming from my career. Giving people support and role to do their job, it's you can't overestimate how valuable and appreciated that is. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Alistair. Tom and Michelle.
Yeah, just to say that I totally agree with that point made there, Alistair and Katie, in terms of that focus. And my question's around the Police Leadership Development Programme and moving away from the diplomas now ceased, and there was the initial cohort going through from the north. So it's about equality of arms. If you're in the east and in the west, how accessible is that programme to us now? And the other thing is around it's a historical situation of almost I don't know if it's an unconscious bias, but in terms of advancement to the average age of service of someone going into the sergeant role, been high. Is there any work going on ongoing within this to tackle that and bringing people through sooner so that they've got the ability to flourish in mid-career rather than the end of career?
Thank you. I might bring DCC Spears on the latter point for any observations that he's got. But I think on the former, in relation to the Police and Leadership Development Programme, the completion of the pilot was actually in March 2022. And subsequently to that, there's been 2 national promotions assessment centres. So we've had two new cohorts have gone through, so that's 48 officers. I think what I would say is given how new this is, then absolutely going forward, there is accessibility and it's opened up. It was really, Tom, getting to a point where we could do the evaluation and get it recognised as the qualification going forward, at which point then clearly there is accessibility for people. So I think that was a good piece of work, and obviously to get it through the approval to be recognised as Police Scotland's new promotion qualification, actually, you know, took quite a bit of work and conversation by the teams to make sure that we were absolutely sure that that was the right thing to do. So now we've done that, we're kind of full steam ahead with it.
Okay, that's great. You're all right with that, Tom?
I think DCC Spears is going to come back regarding the reassurance of service bands.
Yeah, thanks very much. I think in the first instance, Katie's hit on the head what part of our challenge has been. We had a pretty cumbersome leadership diploma course. Whilst it was good and added value, it was lengthy, it was difficult to get on, and it definitely was impacting negatively on officers' ability to progress in the organisation. I think the new approach that we've adopted over the last 18 months or so will see officers younger in service coming through and getting the benefit of opportunities. I also think that the work that we're doing around the Accelerated Leadership Programme, which is in line with the College of Policing, is bearing a lot of fruit, and we've got a really significant number of officers in different ranks who are participating on that programme, which is designed to do exactly what Tom has said, is identifying talent much earlier, developing that talent and taking people forward into more senior ranks, potentially a lot younger in service.
Okay, now I'm going to thread through. Michelle, is yours on this or a separate theme?
Well, it's on the report generally. I'm not sure.
Okay.
So thanks for the report. Huge amount of work going on, and I think I would agree with your comments, Katie, about, you know, possibly the need to stratify, simplify, focus. Again, depending on knowing where the impact, the best impact is, so that's where you can focus and align it with commitments and so on. So all of that. So really welcome all of that. I'm just wondering, just in terms of like the kind of cross-cutting criticality really in between different policy initiatives and recruitment and training, and wondering the extent to which the data that you're gathering as part of this and the use that you're making of your information is giving any insight in terms of any kind of additional or different approaches in relation to the equalities and diversity issue around making sure that promoted posts are representative, both of communities but also of the workforce itself, equally in terms of diversity and so on. So just making sure that activity that's done in the name of learning and development and training and professional development is properly reflective of the intentions in other areas of the force in terms of that strategic approach, particularly in relation to equality, diversity, inclusion, etc.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. I think I guess I kind of look at this through two lenses. One is initial recruitment of a diversified workforce. So to make sure that we have that representation. In fact, there's a paper coming to People Committee on the back of an action in respect of protected characteristics through the recruitment process and what that looks like. The other piece then for me is around retention and development. So, you know, if you've kind of invited the workforce in, how do you engage them in their development and give them a rewarding career? And in part, this talks to an earlier conversation that we were having about the amount of activity that's underway across the organisation and how we perhaps box clever in relation to, you know, what's happening in people and development, policing together, tackling sexism, misogyny, violence against women and girls, and actually how you get that piece across the organisation that all of us are in pursuit to a particular outcome, but how we're able to evidence in a way then that has that alignment, rather than perhaps at the moment we're getting to the point of evidencing, but perhaps it's coming through leadership, it's coming through policing together, etc. So I think that's, you know, that's the ask that we're hearing loud and clear. I think particularly in relation to promotions, I've got two observations. One is that we have a lot of insight around promotions for officers, so that metrics piece, and where we're getting better is around the lived experience. and a lived experience of not only going through promotions, but perhaps officers who decide not to put in for a promotion and understanding why. So what potentially are the barriers to that, whether they be work related or personal related? And so that's one piece. And then I think the other piece that actually we're too silent on as an organisation is for staff. So, you know, when I read this report, that there's a lot that we have in place, particularly for officers, but actually, you know, we've got over 5,000 of our workforce as staff. So what does that start to look like in terms of talent identification, talent development, talent movement? So we know that at the moment that's a gap. We know that, you know, we need to bring it on plan. It's about finding the resource and the right space to do that. But that for me has to be one of our critical areas in 2024, so that it feels like there's perhaps a little bit more parity around that focus on training, development and career paths for all of our workforce.
Thanks, Katie, that's really helpful.
Thank you. So David, and then Susie.
Thanks, Chair. It was just in the wider piece, from an SPF perspective, we're very grateful that we are involved in all of the discussions, I believe, that take place in this piece. And I think that is a credit, you know, to the service that we have that involvement. It was just to urge caution from an SPF perspective around your leadership matters. And I know Katie's smiling as soon as I say those three letters in that order. My concern from the SPF with the feedback that we receive is that this programme will not deliver what it is that the service is looking for it to deliver in terms of that sort of inclusive change. We all understand the constraints, financial and, you know, with people that we're working under. And again, I have to acknowledge that there has been, you know, acknowledgement of our concern and change within the way that that programme is being run. But again, it comes back to a point I believe that Michelle Miller made earlier about, you know, how do we evidence the impact of anything? You know, and this particular programme, it will be really interesting to see whether anything changes at the operational level, because the feedback that we receive, and I will make a point specifically of asking those right up through, you know, to the chief superintendent level about the impact that their participation in this programme has had. And I have to report that, you know, without exception, you know, the feedback is negative. So I just wanted to highlight that so that the board doesn't think that this is, you know, the panacea and has resolved all issues in policing, because we have got some work to do, and our evidence, as I say, that has achieved very little without taking away from the fact that, you know, training is a good thing. Thank you.
David, I think that's really helpful perspective, and obviously you said you're involved in the conversations and the discussions, and you know I would urge you to continue to take that evidence from your members and have that dialogue, and so that we can work on that kind of continuous improvement of how we make that offer, and also looking at the impact that all of the programmes have, and look forward to seeing a revised version of Katie's talking about. And intuitively we probably have too many, but actually through an iterative process, learning how we can find the most effective programmes for people, wherever in their career they are, warrant officers or police staff. Susie.
Yeah, it's really a question for Katie around it and its participation rates. Katie, I'm not an expert here, so are these good participation rates? Because it seems to me there's quite a number of missing senior officers in terms of those initial inputs, as much as a fifth, I think. Not. Do we know why? Is it people who are off sickness absence? Are they out with the force and unable to access? Have we done a bit of digging around that? I'm just concerned that or you know, are they, you know, retiring in a week and didn't really think there was much point in them doing it? I mean, I'm just wondering, if you dug into the people who are missing, why are they missing?
So I think that's a helpful comment, Susie, about you're being thoughtful about the lack of participation and engagement, and Katie, it would be helpful to understand what your thoughts are on that.
Yes, so Susie, thank you. We have done some digging into that. So I mean, I think, you know, what we can see is that 99% of senior leaders have attended at least one of the YLM sessions. And actually, when you then break that down between launch session, the events, and then the close, we see the launch is at 79%. So I'm just reading off the appendices. The events are at 90%, and then the close at 76%. Some of that I'm going to say is capacity, and we will hear that back from colleagues. Simple clashes that cannot move in terms of diaries, but that does also include colleagues who are off on maternity, paternity, long-term absence, etc. So in the main, it is that. I think that on the one hand, attendance tells you something. How motivated potentially does somebody feel to participate in a session. But I think it's, to Federation and Staff Association and TU's challenge to us is about, so what's the behavioural shift? What's the cultural shift? And I think it's not enough to say that, we have 3 sessions, a consolidation session, and then we sit back as an organisation and say, right, that's us done. There's more than we need to do. So how do we get into a rhythm with the Senior Leadership Forum where we're running sessions, every, 2 months? That could be development in focus, it could be particular challenges, so that you build cohorts beyond that, so that you keep practice going. And I think that's the challenge. We're all busy, people feel tick, I've attended, I now kind of move on with my day job. So how we embed that is really important.
Thanks, Chair. It was just really to make the point, it's been a little bit feast and famine with this, or probably famine then feast, is probably the right way to put it. And it's to get people back into that habit of taking that responsibility. I know your Career Matters will do a bit of that, because it put the onus back onto the individual to think about their career development. But we've had a lot of time of people not attending things, and I'm too busy, to attend. But actually, this is not just about you and your workload. This is about how effective you are in your role as a leader of others. So it's really important that you take time for yourself to develop yourself, and it's maybe getting that message out. But Katie's obviously touched on that, saying this is about getting into a rhythm, and I think that's right, and getting normalized again, that actually this is what you do. You develop yourself and you participate, especially if you're a senior leader.
Thanks, Susie. David?
Yeah, thanks. It's just really to come in support of Katie's comments there. I mean, YLM isn't the be-all and end-all of cultural change within Police Scotland, clearly, and part of the evaluation of that programme is an ongoing build. So, like David's point around, people's perspectives, those are built into the programme as it evolves and as featured in each phase. And Your Career Matters is going to be a key delivery vehicle for actually people demonstrating and being encouraged to use the training that they've received under Your Leadership Matters and actually embed that in how they deliver going forward. So I would hope and aspire that will show in terms of the evaluation and in terms of the actual outcomes that we see through the culture of the organisation going forward.
So that's grand. Thanks very much indeed. And we've had a good going round that. Pleased to see all the activity, hoping to see evidence of impact and things moving forwards. So we're over to Jackie then in terms of senior officer recruitment process, which will require our approval.
Thank you. So this paper sets out the overarching process that would be used for any senior officer recruitment required in the next 12 months. Been developed based on the College of Policing guidance and then the learnings from the successful recruitment processes we've ran over the last year. As Fiona said, their members have been asked to delegate the implementation of any required senior officer recruitment to the chair of the authority. I'm happy to take any questions on the content, but that's the kind of overarching ask.
Okay, and it's been a tried and tested procedure that has served us well. Any comments or questions? No. Okay, so content to approve. That's grand. Thank you very much. So before we get to the end then of our public items, can I just step us back to 2.2 in terms of the action log? We're closing the wellbeing report in terms of providing the steps that are being taken, and I think we've had assurance from Katie that that will be ongoing. We've received the trauma and mental health report, which would be proposed to close as well. And the exit interviews, we note that there's further work going on and working in partnership with the staff associations and trade unions, and leadership and talent ladders being circulated. In terms of the sex equality and tackling misogyny, I'm not confident that the paper gave us a lot of narrative, but providing the timeline and details of how progress and impact will be tracked. So I wonder if we could bring that back to our next committee meeting with much more detail in it. But other than that, are members content with the suggested actions of closing and keeping open? I'm seeing nods, so we will do as suggested. And that then leaves us to the end of the public meeting.